In recent years, something interesting has been happening in Africa's international relations. It seems like Africa is starting to turn its gaze away from the United States and towards China. This shift has caught the attention of many, as it reflects the changing dynamics in global politics and economics. Africa is now repositioning itself on the world stage, and its growing ties with China bring along new opportunities, challenges, and implications for both the continent and the rest of the world. So, today, we'll dive into what's driving Africa's move towards China and what it could mean for Africa and the international community. It's a significant trend that's shaping the African continent in the 21st century, and it's worth exploring. For a considerable period of time, the United States has been seen as giving instructions to African countries, viewing them as a region in need of assistance. This perception has been a source of frustration for many African nations that desire autonomy and self-determination. As a result, there has been a noticeable shift in Africa's approach, with countries increasingly turning towards China and distancing themselves from the U.S. This change in direction reflects a growing desire among African nations to forge their own path and make decisions that align with their own interests. The reliance on American guidance has stirred feelings of discontent and a need for greater agency among Africans. In response, China has emerged as an alternative partner, offering economic opportunities, infrastructure development, and a non-interference approach to governance. The decision to lean towards China and step back from the United States is not without its implications. It represents a significant recalibration of geopolitical alliances and economic dependencies. While Africa's move towards China may bring forth new possibilities for growth and development, it also raises concerns about the potential impact on local industries, debt sustainability, and the long-term consequences of aligning closely with a single global power. But the question remains, why are they moving away from the U.S.? African countries have been increasingly wary of the United States, suspecting that the U.S. has its own interests at heart and may be exploiting their rich oil and resource reserves. They believe that the U.S. is primarily interested in their valuable resources and want to ensure they don't fall victim to exploitation. As a result, they have sought alliances with other countries to safeguard their interests. One significant partnership that has emerged is with Russia, which happens to be a major arms dealer. African countries see Russia as a potential ally in protecting their resources and asserting their independence. This has led to an increase in arms trade between Russia and Africa. Additionally, trade between China and African countries has been on the rise. Africans see China as an alternative partner who offers economic opportunities without the perceived strings attached. Consequently, trade between Africa and the U.S. has witnessed a decline. It's clear that African countries are becoming more assertive in protecting their resources and forging partnerships that align with their interests. They are cautious about potential exploitation and are seeking to ensure their own development and prosperity. This shifting dynamic in international relations highlights Africa's desire for autonomy and a more balanced approach in engaging with global powers. African countries have been leaning towards China as a partner because they believe China offers deals that benefit everyone involved, whereas they feel the United States only looks out for its own interests without giving much in return. China's focus on win-win collaboration has made Africa view it as a market for selling products, in addition to valuing its resources. On the other hand, African countries perceive the U.S. as prioritizing its own gains in their dealings, which has left them feeling unsatisfied. This dissatisfaction has prompted them to shift their focus towards strengthening ties with China instead. China's approach of seeking mutual benefits has enabled them to establish a strong presence in Africa. They offer infrastructure development, investment, and trade opportunities that are seen as contributing to the economic growth and development of African nations. Another significant reason for this new alliance between Africa and China is the perception that China consistently honors the deals made and maintains long-lasting relationships regardless of who becomes the president. African countries appreciate this stability and predictability in their engagements with China. On the other hand, the situation seems to be different with the United States. African nations have observed that each new president and government in the U.S. may prioritize different countries or continents based on their own interests and foreign policy agendas. This uncertainty and shifting focus can create challenges for African countries seeking stability and reliable partnerships. By aligning with China, African nations believe they can establish a more consistent and dependable relationship. They value the long-term perspective that China brings to their agreements, as it offers a sense of continuity and reliability, regardless of political changes within China. Plus, then there's the reason that for the longest time USA has been promising bells and whistles to African regions and doing nothing for them. By 2050, Africa is projected to house a quarter of the global population, with half of them being under the age of 25. The continent already boasts the world's largest geographic free trade area, and experts predict its gross domestic product, GDP, could soar to as high as $29 trillion by 2050. It appears that President Joe Biden is recognizing the significance of the region. During the three-day U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in December, the Biden administration consistently emphasized the importance of a partnership. This summit marked the first gathering of its kind since President Barack Obama hosted a similar event in 2014. President Biden conveyed a clear message stating, "The United States is all in on Africa and all in with Africa." As a cornerstone of this renewed commitment, a promise of $55 billion over the next 3 years was made, although some might argue that it falls short for a continent with a population of 1.4 billion, spread across 54 recognized countries. Despite the financial commitment, some African leaders at the summit were less impressed. They have heard promises of increased engagement from U.S. presidents before. Former President George W. Bush, for example, made 3 trips to Africa and initiated an emergency plan for AIDS relief that earned lasting goodwill. Likewise, President Obama traveled to the continent 4 times during his tenure and launched an initiative aimed at improving Africa's power infrastructure, which ultimately fell short of expectations. Nevertheless, the fact that the summit took place at all was seen as a positive development. Former President Donald Trump, in contrast, never visited the continent during his presidency and is remembered for making disparaging remarks about African countries. As Africa's population and economic potential continue to grow, the Biden administration's recognition of the region's importance is a welcome shift. However, African leaders are cautiously optimistic, mindful of past promises, and hoping for substantive actions that will contribute to the continent's sustainable development and prosperity. African officials emphasize the importance of inclusivity and ensuring that the diverse perspectives and interests of all African nations are taken into account. They believe that a top-down approach, where decisions are made without the active participation of all African countries, will fall short in addressing the continent's complex challenges and fostering genuine partnerships. To achieve meaningful results, African officials stress the need for a bottom-up approach, where African nations are actively involved in shaping the agenda and determining the priorities for collaboration. And it looks like the African regions are done with all this chaos from the U.S. One clear example that highlights the changing dynamics is how China has surpassed the United States as a major economic player in Africa. China has become Africa's largest trading partner, with a whopping $254 billion in bilateral trade in 2021, which is 4 times higher than the trade between the United States and Africa. Not only that, China has also taken the lead as the primary source of foreign direct investment, FDI, in Africa, creating numerous job opportunities that exceed the level of U.S. FDI by a significant margin. While it's no surprise that China's economic engagement with Africa has grown alongside its own remarkable economic rise to become the world's second-largest economy, it's important to recognize that China's expansion in Africa is not solely driven by market forces. The Chinese government has played an active role in facilitating this growth, making concerted efforts to establish a stronger foothold in Africa. China's presence in Africa has been driven not only by its need for raw materials to fuel its massive manufacturing base, but also by a strategic and determined approach by the Chinese government to gain influence in Africa. They have taken deliberate steps to increase their commercial activities and become deeply involved in Africa's economic landscape, All the while, the U.S. is slowly getting kicked to the curb. So there you have it. Be sure to leave a comment. And before you leave, why not like and subscribe? See you next time.